I opened my gate, and there she was, Karen. The same blonde bob, the same smug grin, and those expensive sunglasses. My stomach dropped like a stone. This can't be real. "John," she said, like we were old friends. "Wow, small world, huh?" I hadn't seen her in 20 years. The woman who'd stolen $20,000 from me without a second thought. And now, here she was, standing on my property with a clipboard, acting like nothing happened. Something about her smile didn't sit right. But when she told me she was the new HOA president, I realized this wasn't a coincidence. Not even close. Karen stepped forward, clipboard still clutched tightly in her hand, her eyes darting around my yard like she was mentally calculating violations. "You've got such a beautiful place, John. The gazebo, the pond. It's like something out of a magazine," she said, her voice sweet, but laced with an undertone I couldn't quite place. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what this was. She wasn't here to reminisce. She wasn't here to be friendly. She was here to control. She smiled again, her expression going all soft and nostalgic. "I know things ended, well, weird back then," she said, tilting her head like we were still on good terms. "But I always thought you were the hardest working guy at the firm. Such a shame how things turned out." I could feel my blood start to boil, but I didn't let it show. Instead, I met her eyes, steady, cold. "Karen," I said flatly, "you remember me?" Her smile flickered for a moment, but only for a second. The old manipulation was still there, buried beneath her polished charm. She was playing me. Again. But I wasn't the same guy who'd trusted her 20 years ago. This time I'd be ready. I never thought I'd end up here. A landowner, sure. But not like this. Not in the same place where I once lost everything. It wasn't always like this. Back then, I was just a regular guy working as a mid-level marketing analyst in Denver. Long hours, a decent paycheck, and a dream to one day own my own home. I was saving for a down payment, keeping my head down, doing the grind. Then Karen showed up. Tailored suits, that laugh that was just a little too loud, and a charisma that could sell you anything. She wasn't just another coworker. She stood out. And for some reason, she took an interest in me. At first, it was innocent. We'd stay late working on campaigns, share takeout and gossip. She'd tell me about her plans to escape the corporate world, how she was getting into a startup with her brother, a data analytics genius, a real ground floor opportunity. "You can double your money in 6 months," she told me one night, her eyes wide with excitement. The pitch was slick. The deck was polished. I was skeptical at first, but she had a way of making it sound like a revolution. Her brother was a genius, she said. If it was good enough for her, why not me? I asked a lot of questions, but her answers were smooth, rehearsed. The website, the testimonials, the 10 grand she'd already invested, everything looked solid. I wasn't the sharpest, but I wasn't an idiot. I knew the risk, but I took it anyway. It's funny how easy it is to convince yourself you're making the right choice when you want something badly enough. I handed over the check, 20 grand, all my savings. I remember her hug, warm and sincere. "You won't regret it," she promised. 2 weeks later, she vanished. The website went down. Her phone was disconnected. I called her brother's number, no answer. The startup, gone. The money, gone. I was left with nothing, not even an explanation. At first, I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. But then Karen started showing up. Not often, just enough to make me feel like I was being watched. A wave as she passed by my driveway. A random, "How's it going?" when she saw me working on the yard. Always just friendly enough to seem normal. But there was something off. I'd be out back by the pond, and she'd pull into the driveway, her car slowing down as she passed. Sometimes she'd stop and make small talk. Other times she'd just wave and go on her way. I didn't think much of it at first. It's a quiet neighborhood after all. People wave, neighbors check in on each other. But Karen wasn't just waving. She was looking, observing, and every time I caught her eye, that smile of hers made me sick to my stomach. The more she lingered around my place, the more I felt like I was under a microscope. And then one day, there was a letter. Not a normal letter. A printed notice from the HOA. A reminder to maintain the lawn, trim the bushes, a list of minor violations. But it wasn't the violations that made my skin crawl. It was the way it was worded. Passive-aggressive, like a warning. Like they were already looking for a reason to come down on me. A few weeks later, Karen came by uninvited again. This time she had that clipboard. Of course, always with the clipboard. She was just checking in for the HOA. She smiled as if we were old friends, but I knew better. I watched as she walked around my yard, her eyes flicking from the grass to the pond to the gazebo. She didn't ask for permission. She just crossed the line. "Your gazebo, it's beautiful," she said, her tone too casual. "But you might want to be careful with the electrical wiring. It's a safety concern, you know." I froze. I knew exactly what she was doing. Karen had always been good at finding small things to latch onto, twisting them into problems that only she could solve. I wasn't having it. I told her firmly to leave. "You don't need to be here," I said. She didn't even flinch. "Oh, don't be like that," she said, her smile stretching wider. "Just a little friendly advice. I'm just looking out for you." The damage didn't come immediately. It started small, minor, almost unnoticeable things. A broken light fixture by the pond. Some of the tools in my shed had been moved, but the worst was when I found my mailbox, ripped off the post, tossed into the bushes. It wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't have been. I had enough. I called the sheriff's department and filed a report. The deputy told me it was just a case of kids messing around, but I knew better. It wasn't random. Karen had her hands in this somehow. Every time something went wrong, she was the one who showed up, offering helpful advice in that way of hers, always on the lookout for a way in. I started putting up cameras, trying to catch whoever was responsible. The footage came in, but it only made things worse. There was Karen, walking past the camera at 3 a.m. one night, a strange look in her eyes. She didn't touch anything, but her presence was undeniable. She was watching me. And then, things escalated. The sheriff showed up at my door. He wasn't there because of the mailbox or the vandalism. He was there because of a bogus complaint filed by Karen. "She says you've got an illegal structure here," the deputy explained, showing me a complaint form. "A gazebo without proper permits. She also mentioned possible septic issues." I was livid. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was sabotage. I showed the deputy the permits I'd filed years ago, the receipts for every project I'd completed. But the damage was done. The authorities were involved, and now it felt like I couldn't escape Karen's grip on my life. Karen had turned into something worse than just a thief. She was a master manipulator, using bureaucracy and rules to tighten her hold. She wasn't just targeting me anymore. She was using her position to control everything around her, and I was in her crosshairs. But it wasn't until the wedding that I realized how far Karen was willing to go. I was out of state, just for a day. At least that's what I thought. A contract negotiation in Nebraska, one that kept me there longer than expected. By the time I checked my phone, my security app was flooded with motion alerts from my cameras. Something was wrong. I opened the feed and froze. My property, the lawn, the gazebo, everything was covered in tense white lights and folding chairs. The music blasted from speakers I didn't own. People were everywhere, dozens of them, maybe more, dressed in fancy attire, laughing, eating, dancing. And there, standing in the center of it all, was Karen. She was in a champagne-colored gown, microphone in hand, making a toast like she had the right to be there. It was a wedding. Her son's wedding. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was watch as she turned my property into a venue for profit, a place I had worked so hard to build back from the ashes, a place I had fought for. I couldn't reach her. I couldn't stop it. But I would make sure she paid for this, and I would make sure it wasn't the last time Karen underestimated me. The courtroom was unnervingly quiet as I took the stand, eyes locked with Karen. She sat across from me, her face an unreadable mask, but I could see the flicker of unease behind her polished exterior. Her lawyer, a smooth-talking professional, opened with his usual spiel, trying to undermine everything I had said. "This is a simple misunderstanding," he argued. "Ms. Wilson thought she had informal permission to use Mr. Bailey's property. There's no malicious intent here." I leaned forward, feeling the weight of the truth pressing down on me. Karen Wilson hosted a wedding on my land without my permission. She damaged my property, lied about her ownership, and even forged a will to make it look like it was hers, I said, my voice steady. The judge raised an eyebrow and Karen's lawyer hesitated. The room was still. It was clear the judge wasn't buying the defense. "Mr. Bailey, you may continue," the judge said, motioning for me to go on. Christine stood, calm and collected. "Your Honor, we've gathered substantial evidence to support Mr. Bailey's claims." She slid a folder across the table. "Here we have time-stamped footage from Mr. Bailey's security cameras. It shows Karen Wilson walking past, ignoring his clear instructions to leave the property." I watched Karen's expression falter. She hadn't expected this. Christine wasn't finished. She handed over a forensic report, which she laid out with precision. "This is a forensic analysis of the will Ms. Wilson submitted to claim ownership of Mr. Bailey's land. The document is a forgery. The typeface and seal don't match anything from the 80s, and the signature is digitally manipulated." The judge glanced at Karen, whose face was turning ashen. The room was silent as the reality of her deception sank in. But Christine wasn't done with her bombshells. "We've also gathered statements from vendors at the wedding," she said. "Caterers, florists, DJs, all paid directly by Karen Wilson, not the bride and groom. She was profiting from Mr. Bailey's property without his consent." The judge's eyes flicked to Karen. "Ms. Wilson, did you receive payment for the use of this land?" Karen froze, her words stumbling. I thought it was okay. It was my family's land. I thought..." Christine cut her off. "No, Ms. Wilson. There was no agreement, no family access. You fabricated the will. You charged vendors and guests for using Mr. Bailey's property. This was a deliberate scheme to profit off someone else's land." Karen's flawless composure crumbled. Her lips quivered, her face losing all color. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably, realizing they had no defense left. The judge called for a brief recess. When we returned, I could feel the tension in the air. The judge was about to speak, and I knew this was it. "The court finds in favor of Mr. Bailey," she said, her voice firm. "Ms. Wilson is ordered to pay $75,000 in damages for trespassing, property damage, and emotional distress. The court also refers this matter to the district attorney for criminal investigation regarding the forged will and fraudulent misrepresentation of ownership." The words hit like a thunderclap. Karen's face drained of color, and her lawyer sat back in his chair, defeated. I couldn't suppress a small smile of satisfaction. After everything, every lie, every attempt to ruin me, she was finally being held accountable. Karen didn't speak. She just sat there, her eyes glazed, probably trying to figure out how everything had unraveled so quickly. The truth had a way of doing that. The judge's gavel came down, and it was official. Karen's reign of manipulation was over. After the verdict was handed down, the weight I'd been carrying for years finally lifted. Karen's schemes had crumbled, and with it, the grip she once held over me. For the first time in ages, I felt a sense of peace. Christine and I stood outside the courthouse, the weight of the battle settling over me like a calm breeze. "You did it," she said, a smile in her voice. "We did it," I corrected, feeling the relief wash over me. The moment I stepped outside, the world felt different. The community had been watching, and now they were reacting. Neighbors who'd kept their distance before now reached out to offer congratulations. Even those who'd heard the rumors and doubts about me had started to look at me with a new kind of respect. It wasn't just the court case that had shifted the balance. The whole neighborhood felt like it was breathing again. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't isolated. I wasn't alone. It felt like justice hadn't just been served, it had been shared. But Karen's punishment wasn't just civil. The criminal case was just getting started. The investigation into the forged will was fast-tracked, and Karen was soon facing criminal charges for fraud. She couldn't escape the web she'd woven. Her plea deal was swift. She took jail time for the forgery and the illegal rental of my property. Her assets were seized to pay restitution, including the profits she made from hosting the wedding on my land. That money, my money, was now being returned to where it belonged. The HOA, which had supported her reign of control, didn't escape either. Within days of the verdict, Karen was removed from her position as president. The board's credibility had been shattered, and several members who had turned a blind eye to her actions resigned in disgrace. It was clear they hadn't been unaware. They'd just chosen to ignore her manipulation. Now, Things were changing. The neighborhood felt safer, like it was no longer at the mercy of someone who had no regard for boundaries or integrity. 3 months later, everything seemed to have shifted. My property, once a symbol of betrayal, felt like mine again. It wasn't perfect. The gazebo still had a burn mark from the wedding generator, and there were faint footprints on the lawn, but I kept those reminders. They weren't scars anymore. They were badges of resilience. One evening, as I stood by the pond reflecting on how far I'd come, Christine called. Her voice was light, but there was a hint of excitement. "You'll want to see this," she said. "Check your email." I opened my inbox and stared at the screen. The IRS had flagged Karen for undeclared event payments. She'd been pocketing money from the wedding and other events on my land without reporting it. The tax evasion charges were just another layer to her lies. I couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction. The more Karen tried to cover her tracks, the more it all came undone. The universe had a funny way of balancing things out. A few weeks later, one of the HOA members who had once warned me about Karen stopped by. He handed me a bottle of whiskey with a grin. "Guess it's your venue now," he said, referring to the gazebo. It wasn't much, but it meant something. It was an acknowledgement that the neighborhood, too, had been through something together, and now we were free of the poison Karen had spread. Christine continued to visit, at first to discuss the remaining legal matters, but soon it became about more than just business. We spent evenings together, talking about everything and nothing. It was comfortable, easy, and real. Slowly, what had started as a professional relationship began to evolve into something deeper. One evening, after a long day of work, I found myself asking her to marry me. No grand gestures, just a small wooden box and a simple question. "Yes," she said, a smile spreading across her face. We married under the same oak tree where Karen had once hung that "Just Married" banner. This time, it was our moment. The banner now read, "Happily Ever After," a reflection of what we had built together. A few close neighbors came to the wedding, including the florist from Karen's event. The new HOA president gave a toast. "To the new owners of the venue," he joked, nodding at the gazebo. The sun set, and the fairy lights blinked on around us. Christine leaned into me, whispering, "Closure." That night, after the guests left, I stood beneath the oak tree, Christine's shoes in one hand, my tie in the other. The years of anger, resentment, and pain felt like they had vanished. I was no longer haunted by Karen or the past. I was simply here, at peace. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.